So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Rena Moran. I'm a state legislator from St. Paul, representing District 65A. And I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I would like to thank the press for being here today. We'd also like to thank my colleagues for showing up on this very important issue that we're in crisis that we're facing today. And I would also like to thank our community partners for showing up in high numbers to really support the pressing issues that's facing communities of color in the American Indian community. And really it's just too many legislators to name, but I really do support, appreciate the support because we are in a crisis today. Today, 2 House members of color, along with 2 American Indian House members, along with our colleagues, community partners, are calling on House Republicans to take action on the crisis taking place in communities of color throughout the state, throughout our state, the statewide crisis of growing racial economic disparities. I do really want to also point out that we've had absolutely fantastic support, not only from my colleagues, but looking at the leadership that came from Ray Dean from North Minneapolis and also from Joe Mullery. Just want to thank them for their outright support and been leading the issues on racial economic disparities, along with so many of us around up here today. So we represent communities with unique diversities and with unique challenges. The African Americans, African immigrants, Hispanics, American Indians, and the Asian communities. We know from our life experiences that Minnesota communities of color and American Indian are strong and resilient, dedicated to their families, and an essential part of our state economy and social fabric. But we come here today because Minnesotans of color and the American Indian communities face higher barriers to success than their white peers. We know that racial economic disparities are keeping Minnesotans of color from sharing in the prosperity of our economic recovery. Household income of blacks in Minnesota plummet in the past year. From 2013 to 2014, the median income for black households in the state fell 14%. In constant dollars, that was a decline from about $31,500, which is not good, to $27,000, or $4,500 in a single year. Meanwhile, the state poverty rate for black residents rose from 33% to 38%, compared to a stable overall state poverty rate of 11%. So we know that unemployment rate for Caucasian is 3.7%, while the unemployment rate for African Americans and American Indians is 13%. Hispanic at 8%, and Asians are at 6%. And we also know communities of color and American Indians, we're searching for jobs, but we are less likely to get hired compared to our white peers. And we also know these communities do not fare as good as our Caucasian populations. And because of these inequities, we are more likely to live in poverty, we are less likely to own a home, and almost certainly suffer unequal health care outcomes and access to care. The median black household in Minnesota is now worse off than its counterpart in Mississippi. We know the future of these communities and the future of our workforce are interconnected. Our future economic success depends on investing in these families because as white Minnesotans age, communities of color become the future workforce. We know that programs and nonprofits have a proven track record of ensuring economic success for these families. And we can't continue to ignore the issues of racial inequalities, nor can we continue to only blame these communities when the real problem, and the big part of the problem, is the lack of investment in these communities. So we are asking House Republicans to set a budget target for racial economic disparities of at least $50 million for proposals that will directly tackle the economic problems that are present in our communities. The governor and the Senate have shown a strong commitment to these issues. The Republicans have proposed a few racial disparities provision in the omnibus job bill and in a tax bill that would create school vouchers for private schools. So, we know that this is not good enough, and here's why. One, we have a $900 million surplus, a unique opportunity to help where we couldn't before. Two, taking money from job creation funds and claiming to refocus on racial disparities doesn't fix the problem, which is an overall lack of investment in these communities. And furthermore, we need job creation funds to work together with this additional infusion of dollars to address the growing problem. And three, private school vouchers would not help the poor, working class, communities of color, or the Indian American community. The GOP voucher plan assumes that black families in my district, they have money to pay for private school tuition. And that's a big assumption, because they don't. And they simply choosing to spend it on something else because we don't have a tax credit. Well, the fact is, we don't have money. A clear indicator that Republicans are out of touch with communities of color and the American Indian community. The GOP tax credit will refund $3,500 a year, which will rarely cover all the costs for a private school, and assumes that the median black family with an income of $27,000 per year will pay at least 13% of their income in private school tuition. And that's just for one child. No one, black, white, or otherwise, could pay $3,500 for private school while living on $27,000 a year. It's unrealistic, and it won't help the poor, the working poor, and many of the people from our communities. Families in my district aren't trying to escape their schools. They're trying to escape poverty. Families want to work. We are facing a crisis and a statewide emergency, and we are pleading, requesting, with the House Republican leadership to work with us on a solution by setting a budget target for racial and economic equity. And so I would like to turn this over to Representative Susan Allen. Thank you.
I'm State Representative Susan Allen. I represent South Minneapolis District, House District 62B. And I thank all of you for attending and for standing in support here. And especially Representative Moran for leadership in organizing this press conference. The Republicans' refusal to invest a minimum of $50 million to address racial disparities in this session is a huge problem for all Minnesotans. The challenges facing communities of color and American Indians are known to the Republicans, so we can't say that their failure to act is due to ignorance. It is clear that the root of racial disparities is racial bias. The Republicans' failure to act is beyond negligence. What we need from Republicans is inclusion for people of color and American Indians who are being marginalized and are in crisis. Republicans refuse to act even though they've been told for decades that change is crucial. We need to narrow social and economic gaps in order to create a just, balanced, and inclusive economy in Minnesota. We need meaningful, career-oriented employment opportunities for people of color and American Indians so that they will have a chance to raise themselves out of poverty. We know that affordable housing is vanishing for low-income families throughout the state. We know that we have barely made progress in addressing academic discrepancies between students of color and white students. These gaps will not be closed until we address issues of poverty, class, and racial bias. We are urging the Republicans to act now and set aside a budget target to address racial disparities, because whether the Republicans like it or not, the situation is critical. Thank you. And now I turn it over to Representative Mariani. Look behind me.
Well, I'll try to be really brief because my colleagues really captured this, but if you look around the room, you see the face of Minnesota, the true Minnesota. Black, white, brown, Asian, immigrant, American Indian faces. And yet, the big fear that we have, all of us as Minnesotans, that we should have, is that those are the very communities that are being left out of the American dream, are being left out of the Minnesota pathway to prosperity. We have one community in particular, the African American community, where the net worth is going backwards. It's going worse than zero, it's going backwards. That's not the American way, that's not the Minnesotan way. Frankly, that's not the African American way. There's a better way for us to move forward. We have the tools and the instruments in this state to do that. So it's a historic opportunity right now. There's an enormous challenge and an enormous opportunity in front of us right now. The governor has stepped forward with a huge plan. The Senate has stepped forward with huge plans. The House has not done the same. It's like showing up to a very important dance without a dance partner. And in this place, you got to have dance partners. Minnesota deserves partnership that cuts across partisan lines, that cuts across the executive branch and the legislative branch to do the people's work. We have the instruments in state government to do this work. The governor has identified some of those, the Senate has identified some of those, and we're in the House, unfortunately, proceeding in a manner where we're just going to do a little bit here. It's an enormous historic opportunity before us. It really requires nothing less than enormous, bold action that really drives huge systemic change. There are lots of good ideas in the House here. Unfortunately, most of them have been bottled up as the majority has refused to come to the dance at the same level of commitment and urgency and intensity and setting the same kind of fiscal targets that the Senate and the governor has set. It's time for Minnesotans to say to the Minnesota House, wake up, do the people's work, do the right thing. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Peggy Flanagan. I'm the state representative from District 46A, which is St. Louis Park, Golden Valley, Plymouth, and Medicine Lake. I am also an enrolled member of the White Earth Nation. And I'm really excited that we've had such an incredible turnout this morning. It is clear that this is an issue that is important to folks in Minnesota. We have seen the governor take an important first step. We have seen the Senate take an important first step in investing in communities of color and American Indian communities, and we also need to see the Republican House leadership take that step as well. The face of Minnesota is changing. It is becoming increasingly diverse, and we need to make sure that folks of color, American Indians, are part of the conversations to improve our way of life in Minnesota. A good friend of mine often talks about the need to make sure that the kids on Lake Street are doing just as well as the kids in Lake Wobegon. And I believe that is who we are as Minnesotans, right? I hearken back to Senator Paul Wellstone when he said we all do better when we all do better. And investing in communities of color and American Indian communities helps us to get there. You know, I believe that we are in a position where we're having these conversations for the first time about racial equity. In the Senate, the governor, and the House, we started these conversations in the Racial Economic Disparities Work Group. And clearly, there is an energy to want to continue these conversations and to make sure that we are investing in children and families of color and American Indians. I also believe that this is a first step, and it's important to say that this is a first step. the first time we're having these conversations. And I believe that myself and my colleagues have a deep commitment to ensure that we are continuing conversations about the need for racial equity, and that this is a thread that we have to weave through our policy making to ensure that all Minnesotans are achieving, all Minnesotans have the opportunity to thrive. So we need to make sure that communities are part of the solution. Too often around this place, we make decisions on behalf of people without having them at the table. And clearly, we have folks who have come today and more people who are willing to participate in these conversations. So thank you for coming, and we just call on House Republican leadership to join us in coming up with solutions in partnership with communities of color and American Indians to ensure a better way of life for all Minnesotans. Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to open it up for any questions you may have.
Yes, Don Allen, Our Black News. My first question would be, this time, how is the accountability going to work? Say if MSure gives or grants an agency in North Minneapolis $200,000 to make sure African Americans that you speak of have health insurance and still 95% do not. How is that corrected this time? How, with this money, where's the plan? What's the process? And as a Republican myself, I know the Republicans are open to do anything to work with the DFL and the black community. So can you explain that to me, please?
So I will open up, Don Allen, and say that that's why we're here today. We're asking for a target. We're asking for some intentional investment. And we cannot move forward in the House of Representatives without the Republican leadership taking some leadership on this issue, because we are at a crisis now. Our families, black families, communities of color, are in a crisis. I read the stats about, we have moved backwards from $31,000 for a medium income for black families. And now we're at $27,000. So unless the Republican leadership can step up and step forward and do some real investment in communities of color, in partnership with communities of color, we will continue to be in this crisis state.
Representative, Republicans have distributed this between the jobs bill and the education bill, about $25 million that they say address disparities. Is this a step forward? Is this just not the right mix or enough? What's your reaction to that?
It is a very, very little beginning, and anyone else can join in this. But again, it's moving money around, taking money from here to put money there, and it's not a real investment in the way that needs to be done for our communities that are in crisis.
Okay. As president of the Minnesota Black Nurses Association. Sherilyn LaChapelle, president of the Minnesota Black Nurses Association. There is a very real crisis. The inequalities are real. The illness is real. The lack of access not only to food, jobs, and health care, so real. If the Republicans are serious about helping and doing their part and ending all this and saving money, then they will provide the communities that need the most with the things they need to not only survive, but to prosper. That's the American way, and that's the thing that they owe, not only the people up north on the Iron Range, but the people down here in the cities. That's my point.
What investments would you like to see specifically in the realm of healthcare
Well,
that would
number
help?
one, I'd like to see a national health care plan. In this state, single payer.
Mary, I've been on the Jobs Committee for about 20 years. I sat through every meeting this year. And if they're claiming there's 20 million, if they're claiming there's $1 million in the Jobs Committee for diversity, I want something that they're smoking.
Yes. Yes.
There's $600,000 that I can identify for one group, and I think there's about another $700,000 for another particular group. We have a crisis of workforce coming at us. And unless we're willing to invest millions of dollars in getting people ready to take over the state when we baby boomers retire, our state's in huge trouble. We have 125,000 jobs that are going to be retiring out of the workforce employees retiring out of the workforce, and they are doing nothing in that bill to replace those 125,000 people.
Didn't you get $1 million for the neighborhood development center in the bill?
That is true. So I guess it was, rather than 750, it was $1 million.
Phyllis Kahn from District 60B. I'll give you a really specific example. In the legacy bill, which we don't usually look at for racial equity, there have been, the Republicans have picked on projects that always are going to Indian nations. The one, and there will be an amendment offered on the House floor to restore this. This was a project that was supported by the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Commission to the White Earth Tribe to get some terrific land preserved for wild rice production from potlatches selling this. Tremendous developers will really want this. Potlatch would like to have it, the tribe acquire it. It was in the initial bill. The Republican Environment Committee took it out. We tried to put it back in. There'll be another opportunity to put it back in on the floor of the House. The previous problem with argument between with the Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Commission was actually the Fond du Lac ban. Somehow, whenever there's an Indian tribe involved, there seems to be some problem with using legacy funds for it. So there'll be an opportunity on the House floor to correct this.
So I think it's important to, again, acknowledge there's a $900 million surplus. And that when Republicans are talking about 25 million here and there, that's a shell game in many ways, right? We want new investment in our communities. When we're talking about vouchers and tax credits, for many families that, frankly, that won't make a big difference to, we have led on an agenda of investing in education. We have led on an agenda of investing in our littlest Minnesotans, right, where we believe many of these racial and economic disparities start. So while I appreciate that Republicans are beginning to talk about this, I believe that we need new dollars and new money and new investment, because if we don't have that, we are not going to turn the curve on racial disparities in our state.
As days pass and the state of the economic state for minorities, I'm an inventor, I'm an entrepreneur. As days pass, you guys feud, go back and forth, you try to engage. It's really like a bad relationship, right? And so while that happens, the children, the entrepreneurs, the people that can make the world work, the people that create the froth at the top, the one that froth that everybody likes, are being held down, right? And so if we can't have an opportunity to, for example, have outlets or streams to invest in entrepreneurs like myself, inventors like myself, who will drive economic development from the bottom up in places like North Minneapolis, people like me who sit at the eatery at Sammy's and collectively find ways to work together to comprise a real enterprise, a black business. At what point in time does the ego sit down, and at what point in time does real life take over? Because at this point, you're in an emergency, right? It's been many, many years that you all talk about this. It's been many, many decades you all talk about this. Now at the cusp of an emergency, at the cusp of the end, at the end of all, because what happens, I know all these stats you've shared with us today. I've memorized these stats because they affect me every day. And so as I touch minority entrepreneurs, and as I come across the few Native Americans that I do have the pleasure to meet, what I realize is that there are no real opportunities to rise up or come out of a situation. And then again, I'm in the legislative house, and I'm talking to people who have planned years out. And again, we're at the very end of we got to do something. Now, all you all professionals, I'm sure the Republicans are professionals too, and some are business owners and no business owners, and know that the very end planning never works. Waiting to the very end to do something about that never works. So my question is, at what point and how long will it take to come to a common ground and make implementation instead of talking?
Thank you, brother, for the question. Let me just say this. There's that old adage about when something doesn't work, you know, why are you continuing to do that while you have this pressing issue in front of you? You know, do something new, do something different, get outside the box, match up with reality. Now, let me tell you, you know, we're up here, I think all of us, at least the electeds up here, are Democrats. And clearly, the big message here is a call out to our Republican colleagues who are in control of this body to step outside the box, to step up big, and let's stop doing what we have been doing, including what we've been doing as Democrats so many years. Clearly, the issues before us didn't show up overnight. The issues before us really speaks to a failed approach on the part of the legislature, on the part of the executive branch, on the part of the state. It's not the failure of these communities. These communities are dynamic.
What can we do?
They're desirous and they work hard. What we can do, and the message today is, step up the way the light bulb has gone on in the executive branch. The light bulb has gone on in the Senate. Clearly, the light bulb has gone on with a minority of legislators here in the Minnesota House, but it has not gone on with those who control this body, who shape the bills, who set the targets, so that they in fact can be outside the box, new approaches and big approaches, not little pieces that are tucked away in our existing approach to work, but big approaches, because meanwhile, we have families whose net worth is going backwards in the state of Minnesota. Our approach is not, our traditional approach is not going to respond to their needs. We need new approaches. That's what this press conference is about today. It's led by dynamic people, including legislators of color, who are being pressed and led by communities of color. The voices you're hearing here are the voices from our communities that say, stop doing what you're doing, do something new, do something big.
Representative Mariani, what are
Yes.
the prospects? We're at less than a month to go here. What are the prospects? Do you think the governor is really going to lean in on this in negotiations in the Senate when it comes down to, you know, 3 guys in the room cutting the deal at the end?
Yeah, it comes down to that too. So the advantage is that 2 of the 3 guys in the room get it. So that should be a good advantage. And so the question is, what kind of stubbornness, what kind of ear-plugging kind of approach, you know, is the majority going to enter into that conversation? Or is there in fact going to be an open mind and a willingness to adjust and change quickly? We definitely are going to have to count on Senate leadership and the governor to really press this issue. They've indicated to me that they're dead serious about driving big change this year. I mean, how much more serious than putting $100 million on the table can you be? How much more serious than putting $30 million just for economic development can you be? But you're correct. It takes all 3 at some point to come to an agreement, and we don't have much time to do that.
State Rep, those are really good words. I have one more question, and I just want you to realize that anything times 0 is going to equal 0. But my main question is that there are a large population of homeless veterans, African Americans on the street in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I am a veteran, honorably discharged in 1981, and I don't see the state, I don't see any of these agencies or partners even focusing on those homeless veterans that are downtown, sleeping now where the Prince Memorial is, hanging out because there's people there that bring food. What are the plans for the Minnesota veterans from this group, our partners, or anybody?
Our state has actually taken some really strong steps in regards to veterans.
You cannot get hired, excuse me. DEED is not hiring veterans. Met Council is not hiring veterans. We have a group of 40 veterans, some of them graduates from Hamline University like myself, that have applied for these jobs. Not that we need a job, but we wanted to see what this legislation was doing from mandated by Governor Dayton to these state agencies to hire veterans, and it's not happening. The school district, the Minnesota Board on Teaching, all these people are ignoring, especially veterans of color. You better not apply if you're a shade darker than khaki. And so we have a big problem with that, and we need this addressed because the veterans are also a part of this picture.
Right on.
Thank you.
Absolutely right. You know, and so again, the message here is stop doing what we have been doing, do new things, do them bigger, you know, and do them guided by the experiences and the wisdom that come from communities of color.
Thank you, sir.
And so I would just like to just end this by saying that this is a beginning. This is a first step. The investment that needs to be made, this is the first step. We will be having more in conversation and engaging our communities of color over the summer and bring this back into 2017. So I just want to thank you all for being here today, and we're definitely calling out the Republicans to make a commitment and set a target. Thank you.
Very good job.